This week, my guest is Chris Luecke, host of Manufacturing Happy Hour, a bi-monthly YouTube video series. Manufacturing Happy Hour covers the latest in automation trends and technology over a cold one. Chris started the show in 2016 and has done over 30 episodes. Chris is an OEM specialist account manager with Rockwell Automation and likes to record his show to help clients get to know him and make automation more approachable. In this episode, Chris shares some of his favorite subject matter discussed for the show, why he decided to become an engineer, and he recommends a podcast that focuses in on manufacturing. Check out the Art of Manufacturing podcast by Z. Holly, and subscribe to Chris's YouTube show, Manufacturing Happy Hour. If you know somebody in industrial automation who you want to be on our show, contact me at podcast@controlsys.org, controlsys.org, and introduce them to the show. If you like our show, please rate us on iTunes and share your favorite episode on LinkedIn. Please tag me to let me know. Find a list of all episodes at talkingindustrialautomation.com. By the way, did you know there's a searchable list of qualified system integrators hosted by CSIA? Visit CSIAexchange.com. Now, enjoy getting to know Chris Luecke.
You're listening to the Control System Integrators Association's Talking Industrial Automation podcast, where you get to know the people that make modern manufacturing and processing possible. Now, here is your host, Tony Veroven.
Thanks for downloading the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. This is a show to help you get to know the people that make modern manufacturing and processing possible. I'll be talking industrial automation with CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve manufacturing and process challenges, and how they became successful in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, I hope you will enjoy the insights CSIA members will bring to this podcast. Hi, it's Tony Veroven, and we're talking industrial automation with Chris Luecke. He's the host of Manufacturing Happy Hour, and he's also an account manager with Rockwell Automation. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how's it going, Tony? Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you. I've been stalking you on LinkedIn and here and there, and I've been looking forward to having you on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and that seems to be the nature these days. People are catching me on YouTube or LinkedIn and forming a bit of a social media relationship there first. So excited to talk to you face to face, if only virtually today.
Yeah, exactly. We were just in San Francisco. I know I think you're based out of the Bay Area, and we were just in San Francisco for the CSIA conference. And unfortunately, I think I discovered you just afterwards, so I wasn't able to connect with you then.
I believe so. Yeah, I heard good things about the CSIA show out here. So unfortunately, we just missed one another, but I'm sure there will be plenty of other opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, and there also seemed to, while our conference was going on, there was also the OSI Soft Pi World was going on. So San Francisco was a hotbed of control systems and automation talk and learning.
It seems to be the way these days. It's got more of a maker scene and a manufacturing scene than people would initially expect at first glance.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really cool. It was my first visit out there, so it was definitely kind of get the vibe of the technology. We all talk about, us in the flyover states. Let's talk about the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And so it was really kind of cool to see things up close in person.
Well, it's been cool to see it evolve, and I wouldn't discount the flyover states too much. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, so Midwestern born, Midwestern proud. But it is exciting to see how manufacturing has evolved out here in the Bay Area over the years, especially with companies like Tesla really coming up. And, a lot of that really ties into the story behind Manufacturing Happy Hour, which I'm excited to get into with you today.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into that, let's kind of talk a little bit about you and kind of how you got to where you are, because you do work for Rockwell. So let's talk a little bit about like maybe why you got into the show and why you're doing the show there first. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you do for Rockwell and how you got there.
Yeah. So throughout my career, I have been an account manager, sales engineer, account executive, whatever title you want to put on it. Essentially, I've been in sales and marketing for Rockwell, serving an account base currently in the San Francisco Bay Area, primarily made up of equipment manufacturers in the high-tech space, and that can include semiconductor, solar, anything that thin film. Those would be the industries that I'm serving right now. But I came up through the ranks through the sales training program, did the first 4 years of my career in Houston, Texas, serving the process and oil and gas industries. So quite a change when I came out here. And one thing I noticed when I was serving the market here in the Bay Area is that it skews younger. The decision makers, everyone has their visions of 20-something year olds running the show at Facebook and Google. And, the same holds true for the manufacturing sector out here. You have a younger demographic. You also, in where I would describe the oil and gas industry as looking for really proven, really robust, tested technologies and automation. In the Bay Area, that whole hacker mentality and that tech mentality bleeds over to manufacturing. So you have a lot of folks that are willing to try new technologies, new automation technologies. They're willing to be those early adopters. It moves at a faster pace, and I realized I needed to come up with a platform that catered to a fast-moving, oftentimes younger demographic. And one day I had the idea in my home office where I'm sitting right now, and I'm like, you know what? I should do a video newsletter for my customers. And I had this interesting idea of maybe doing it over a pint of a cold beverage to make it more approachable. And I sent a little test video out to some of my peers and mentors within Rockwell and said, hey, here's this idea I'm thinking of. And since it's a video, instead of writing you an email about my idea, I'm sending you a short 3-minute video. What do you think? And got some feedback from there. And that was the very beginnings of Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Excellent. I love it. Yeah, I think, and that's how I discovered it, was that it just seemed like it was very cool, very approachable. Manufacturing Happy Hour, a great name, and definitely denotes something, maybe a little less formal than industrial automation is a cool thing, but it's also very technical, and maybe if you're a manufacturer, to maybe get into the details, maybe something might think of something it might be too dry, or some sort of video or data sheet or getting into spec.
Yeah.
Which, if you're an engineer, it still might be exciting. But
Yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, the perception of automation, and probably more specifically the manufacturing industry as a whole, if you were to ask someone that's not involved in that space, they'd probably think something very old school, something very traditional industrial. They're not necessarily thinking about the technology and the visualization and the data and all the exciting, almost flashy things behind the process that make things tick and allow the people running those organizations to make decisions around their process. So it was a way to provide some unique, approachable branding to it that would take that perception of old school industry to something that's new and innovative.
Right. Yeah, and I love it because, here we are doing a podcast, and again, we try to make this stuff approachable, conversational, versus the old way of sales and marketing is just, put up a brochure and hope somebody calls you, sort of thing. And hopefully where, somebody, as an account manager and building relationships with manufacturers, it makes you more approachable and say, hey, Chris seems like a cool guy. He sounds knowledgeable. I'll definitely take his call, or I'm going to respond to his email.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually just hit on another really important point about it, Tony, is that selling in this day and age is different than it was, 20 years ago, even 10 or 5 years ago. There's that expectation that social selling, as we call it, where you have a presence on LinkedIn, you have a presence on YouTube or Facebook or whatever platform your audience is on. There's that expectation that you're going to have some content out there, but not only an expectation, it's a smart thing to do as well, because even though I can't be in front of every one of my clients every minute of the day, this gives me the opportunity to put something out there that even when I'm not sitting across the table from them, they still see my face, they still see the topics and the value that my company brings, and it makes the continuation of that conversation much easier in the modern age.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about the show. How many episodes have you done? When did you start?
Yeah, so it started in October of 2016. So we're over the 1.5 year mark at this point, and it's surprising to think how quickly it's gone by. And it's essentially, I would say, a bi-weekly show. I'd still like it to be a bit more consistent, where I know I've got an episode dropping every week or every other week, but we're in the 30-plus episode mark right now. And it really started as a way to talk about some of the products and the technologies that people weren't necessarily familiar with from Rockwell Automation right off the bat. A lot of people, when they think of Rockwell, the first thing that comes to mind is a PLC, a controller, automation. They don't necessarily think about some of the services and solutions, the industrial components, everything else that supports that core part of the industrial automation infrastructure. So we started it off as a product and solution series, for lack of a better word. But very quickly, we found that there were other directions we could take the video series beyond talking about just what Rockwell does. We could talk about bigger issues impacting the manufacturing industry, like generations in the workforce, or how can manufacturing companies, kind of like we were talking about before, adopt more of a new school entrepreneurial mentality. And we feature guests not only within Rockwell Automation, but people outside of Rockwell as well that are thought leaders in the manufacturing space on the show. So it's been an evolution in terms of the type of content we've featured. We still mix in some things that are a bit more tactical, a bit more product oriented, but we want it to appeal to an audience that consists of executives that are trying to figure out, hey, what are the issues that are impacting my business, and who can I help to solve those, as well as the engineers that are watching these videos that need to know more of the bits and bytes.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about the, I guess, the production of this. Are you putting this only on YouTube? Have you also started a podcast? What's kind of your idea about distributing this message?
Yeah, great question. So I don't want to give too much away just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a podcast in the near future to do some longer form content. So far, though, it has been primarily short. We shoot for 3 to 5 minute videos. So it's meant to be a quick overview on a topic, where our objective is for someone to get 1, 2, 3 at most takeaways from a short video. It's not meant to give you everything, but it's meant to give you enough to be dangerous and, continue to do more research from there, or engage Rockwell or engage an industry expert on the topics that we bring up. So it's been primarily distributed through YouTube and then LinkedIn as a social platform. There's a lot of traction there, because I think a mistake that a number of individuals and companies make when they start putting out content or start developing their social media strategy, they're very focused on, putting out content on a consistent basis, putting out content that aligns with their messaging. And those are very important pieces of that process. But the real value from putting out content like this on social media is the type of conversations that start to come up in the comments and the discussions that take place, and when you throw something on LinkedIn, as you well know, you can tag your peers, you can tag your customers potentially, and start bringing more people into that conversation by sharing that content. And more often than not, the content that gets shared is content that has a good, concise message, but also comes off in an authentic standpoint. And that was, we've talked about it in certain terms so far, but authenticity was a big part of doing the Manufacturing Happy Hour show in the format where you see us enjoying a pint of a beverage and talking about automation and technology.
Right. So do the topics find you, or do you choose the topics? I mean, how do you determine who you're going to talk to and kind of where the direction of the arc of the show is going?
Yeah, that is a great question, Tony. And I think the unique advantage that I have being a salesperson still is my day job is I get to hear what my customers' biggest needs and biggest challenges are on a daily basis. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest things in industrial automation right now, as you know, is the industrial Internet of Things, digital transformation, smart manufacturing. I could probably spend another minute just highlighting buzzwords on those topics. But the feedback I was getting from my customers was, we want to see some case studies of actual Internet of Things solutions or smart manufacturing solutions in action. So I took that feedback and I approached one of my counterparts in the field, Maciek Kranz, who's the Vice President of Strategic Innovation over at Cisco, and also the author of a book called Building the Internet of Things. And I said, Maciek, I've been getting this feedback and people want to hear about some actual examples of other industrial customers that have implemented smart manufacturing solutions. And knowing that Maciek was an expert in that area, I said, why not we do a 4-part mini-series highlighting different pieces of what a smart manufacturing solution looks like. So we got together, we filmed an episode, and that's been some of my highest engaging content because it follows the trend of really, what's your audience asking for? What are your customers asking for? And that's really where you need to gear a lot of the content that you make, in my opinion.
What has been some of the most, so obviously the buzzwords, you talk about smart industry and IIoT and sort of those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. What's kind of been your favorite topics so far that you've done?
Yeah, so I would say my favorite topics are the ones that are certainly more in the what issues are impacting manufacturing, what trends are impacting manufacturing, versus the tactical, product-oriented conversations. So certainly the Internet of Things conversations I was just having with Maciek were a high point. Another one that we had a lot of fun with was I brought on an individual named Christina Z. Holly, and she's been very successful in the startup space. Been with multiple companies that have been bought and sold, and she's helped found some research divisions at MIT and USC. Just a very accomplished woman in the technology space. And lately, she's been very focused on the maker space and manufacturing. She runs a podcast called The Art of Manufacturing, which is another great show where she features makers behind some of the most interesting technologies out in the field these days. But since she had that startup focus and she has the current maker focus, I said, would you mind doing an episode with us where we talk about what can established manufacturing companies or the manufacturing industry in general do to adopt more of an entrepreneurial mindset? How can you move quickly? How can you make decisions that may or may not work, but fail quick enough that you can learn from them? And what would you say the biggest takeaways are for traditional manufacturing companies that can learn from the agility that we're currently seeing in the startup space? So that was another highlight, just finding parallels between manufacturing and I guess the generic technology industry as a whole, which if you think about it, manufacturing and technology are not too far apart. Oftentimes one is just very software centric and the other has a physical product and hardware element to it. So
right. Yeah. We're definitely seeing that. When I talk to system integrators, there's many different types of system integrators. There are IT integrators, and then there are manufacturing kind of OT plant level. And so talk to us a little bit about that. Obviously all you hear these days, besides IIoT and smart industry, but you also hear about the IT and OT convergence. Tell us a little bit about that as far as your take on that and where that's going.
Yeah, so that is one of, it relates back to the Internet of Things conversation, where now everything can be on that like Ethernet network. So before, where you had a separate business network and a separate plant floor network, now people are starting to see the power of bringing those two together, where information that's on the plant floor impacts what's in your business systems real times and the decisions that are made. What I would say that the biggest thing with that is helping people recognize that process is a journey. It's nothing that happens overnight, because it's as much cultural as it is technology related. You highlighted it, information technology and operations technology. One of the first things is making sure you're getting the IT group and the operations group in the same room to have these conversations. And a lot of times there's been I would say a deferral type of mentality, where someone says, no, that's IT's responsibility. Or on the opposite end, someone says, no, that's my responsibility and no one else should be making a decision around that. So in addition to recognizing that there are technologies that need to be implemented over time to pull together convergence that ultimately makes an organization more agile and able to make better, quicker decisions, there's also a massive cultural element to it. And that's when I think of the biggest things to highlight around that, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, for our listeners, I think, if you're not involved in industrial automation and maybe don't have an understanding what IT and OT is, this is the sales and marketing wall, and this is the sales and marketing headbutting, right? It's the turf, it's the finger pointing on both sides. That's how I see that, like the culture war. It's definitely the account managers and the salespeople and the business development folks kind of versus the marketing team, and they're not getting me great leads and that sort of thing. And now these are coming. There's been discussion of how sales and marketing have started to converge. Yeah, it's not this two different departments anymore, or shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think there's an element of natural convergence, because there are some parallels between, let's say, operations and information technology coming together, as there is with sales and marketing coming together. And I'm going to jump back to the sales and marketing side of it, with the ability to make a video so easily now. For example, a salesperson, all they need to do is pull up their iPhone to record a video that they can all of a sudden put on LinkedIn or put on YouTube and reach their audience that way. And as a result of that, they're kind of doing a marketing function in that regard, because they're putting out messaging that's going to stay online. It'll also impact someone's perception of the brand. So it's just the way things have been evolving. There's some natural convergence, but there's still, whether we're talking sales and marketing, whether we're talking OT and IT, there's still some, I don't want to say hand-holding per se. That's not necessarily the perfect word for it, but there still needs to be an intentional element to bringing those two together.
Right. Well, now you talked about, your preference and topics and kind of how you like the tone of the show to go. What are some of the trends that you do see, and that you're, maybe make some either predictions or identify some challenges that maybe any customers listening should be aware of if they're not already?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen for my customers in the field, and I'll continue on with our smart manufacturing and IoT discussion, is just that struggle of knowing where to start. With as much data that's available today, it can seem overwhelming, whether you're talking about an end user that has this data that's trying to figure out how do I dissect it into usable information, or whether you're thinking of an equipment manufacturer that's providing a piece of machinery to their customer that's asking themselves, how do I make this machine smarter? How do I put value-added functionality on there that can allow me to beat out my competition, provide a machine that has a higher cost point, and still have the customer find value in it? And my feedback to people, or the one thing that I think we're seeing out here is people are starting to recognize it's not about asking, I have all this data, what do I do with it? It's actually the other way around, where they need to ask themselves, what do I want my business, my operation, or my machine to do tomorrow that it's not currently doing today? And then walk backwards and implement the appropriate technologies to do something along those lines.
Right.
And, I'll give a quick example. A lot of times I think it's simpler than people make it out to be. There's this whole mentality around smart manufacturing and digital transformation that it really feels like it is something that's this massive undertaking, when really, let's say you want to implement some remote operations, to an extent, it's just about making sure you're looking at the right data, having the right sensors on your equipment, aggregating that in the right spot, and then drawing conclusions from that. It doesn't have to be something that takes years and years. It's ultimately a journey that takes some time, but there are little steps you can bite off along the way to start differentiating equipment, or to start getting more information out of your process that you didn't have yesterday.
Right. And obviously a lot of manufacturers have some really talented folks. Maybe they've come out of school and they've worked at several other manufacturers. Where does it make sense to, let's back up a little bit. Obviously they can hire great historians and other companies to sort of help them collect this information, and that all connects with products and services that you guys are outputting. Where does it make sense, or when does it become overwhelming that they might need to think about using a system integrator and maybe going out of house versus in house?
Yeah, no, that great question, and that's with as you know how much the industrial sector seems to be booming these days. It's hard to find that talent, whether it's inside of your company or outside of your company. I think from what I see as someone that has worked with both equipment manufacturers and end users, as well as the systems integrators that play into that community. One thing that a systems integrator, a third party, can provide is some overall sensibility of how that system will look and play together down the line. There tends to be a challenge in our industry of when someone is specifying their control system or specifying their automation system, they'll say something vague along the lines of, well, use Allen Bradley controls. And that can mean a whole lot of different things if you're not specifying your protocols and the way that system is going to tie together and communicate. I think really when and this is kind of a message for end users more than anything, when you're undertaking a large project, the ability to coordinate your equipment manufacturers and your systems integrators or system integrator, depending on the scope of the project, the ability to coordinate in advance and consult them on the best practices that they're seeing from multiple locations, that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice.
Gotcha. What are now? How deep do you get into project work? Do you kind of lead somebody up to a project engineer type of, then they onboard them, or where do you kind of fit? I mean, obviously you're in sales, but obviously you have to have a decent amount of knowledge about how this stuff works.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing with how energized the industrial sector is these days, there's a lot of expectations around timing and making sure you're working with folks that understand how long a task is going to take, making sure we're going to get the right individual on that project. Personally, I don't do a lot of project management work myself, but I do similar to my advice on how to work backwards from where your company is today and where you want it to be down the line. I take a holistic look early on if, let's say, a company is bringing in a systems integrator or bringing in some engineers to assist with the projects, making sure that there's some pretty clear expectations and making sure that they've got the right people on their staff to coordinate with the engineers and the integrators working on a project, and making sure there's a realistic approach and realistic expectations on the controls work that's taking place.
What sort of, how do you lead a customer I guess, into a conversation about, how they can make some improvements to their processing and their manufacturing. I guess meaning, how I always ask this questions of system integrators and suppliers as well. What kind of advice would you give to prospective customers? I guess researching you, putting out an RFP, writing an RFP. How can they be a good customer, right? So sometimes, from another end, we've seen like, oh, I wish they would have done this earlier. I wish the customer would have done this, or wish they would have asked me this. So thinking about, guiding them of like a perfect customer, an informed customer would have done this. Is there any kind of advice that you can give to, I guess, how customers can be an informed customer or make good decisions when it comes to upgrading their plant or putting in a new system?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to give my customers and then customers in general credit. A lot of them are very informed when they go into these decisions. Like they've done their, like, just the way selling goes now. They've done a lot of their research online. They know what the products do. They've probably seen some case studies and success stories. So I do think customers do a good job of educating themselves in advance. What my biggest advice is, with that, the other side of the coin is be open to realizing that there are experts out in the field that deal with these challenges every day. They see it from at least 5 different angles. So part of that comes into being open to feedback, having humility to say, hey, I don't know everything. This is what I've seen so far, and this is what I think fits my application for the solution that I'm looking for. But I would say the earlier you can engage someone in your design process versus right before you're planning to buy something, the easier it is to help map out what solution you're looking to have implemented. Because when you are able to research things that much independently in advance, sometimes there is a tendency to wait until the last minute to say, hey, I think I know exactly what I need. And there might be some tweaks there that can make your overall project a little easier if you bring in a consultant or an educated salesperson or an integrator in advance of those final decisions where it's about time to hit the buy button.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, Chris, because I was just speaking with an integrator who really kind of echoed this same type of sentiment where there was a situation, and probably multiple situations, where the client has researched all this information. They've got all these widgets and PLCs and sensors and things all coming, and then they engage an integrator or a consultant, but this stuff's already on a truck. It's headed their way, and so ultimately, a good consultant or an integrator can make this all work together. But like you said, had they had a little more advanced notice, maybe they would have said, we'll get this model instead of that model, or get this platform versus that platform. It would have been a little bit better for, obviously optimization, right? You can always make it work. I always think that, integrators, they're the professional, like square peg, pounders into the round hole, right? They can always make it work, but with a little advance notice and some planning, it would make things even better.
Totally. And I've got to hand it to Rockwell's systems integrator community, many of which are within the CSIA as well. They're experts on the front end of that conversation, whether it's, if they are engaged early enough to consult, or like you said, the square peg in the round hole experts. That's a new line I might have to steal from you in the future to describe them, because
absolutely
they do a great job at that too.
Well, in this industry, I'm pretty much considered a layperson. I don't come from, I'm not an engineer. I don't come from this area. I'm a sales and marketing person myself. But I just pretend to be self-informed here and use big words and acronyms. Right? Maybe I sound like I know what I'm talking about sometimes.
Well, Tony, give yourself more credit than that, because one of the big things I learned from doing manufacturing happy hour, and I'm sure you're learning from doing talking industrial automation, is you learn a ton the more you get to have these conversations. So It's amazing where you find yourself when I first started at episode 1 to where I am now over 30 episodes in. So yeah, you definitely know what you're talking about. You're in tune with a lot of the trends that I'm hearing in the industry. And
well, I appreciate that.
I appreciate the good questions you've been asking.
Well, yeah, and so that's I think like you said, it helps you understand what are the trends, what are the things that are going on, and some of the challenges. And so, as I was saying before, and kind of just in my way to kind of dumb down things, is that's how I interpret of like, okay. Really what these guys are is they got the big hammer and they make connect these two things that maybe weren't supposed to, because ideally someone would use your company, or you would use a Rockwell platform from A to Z, right? But that probably or your Encompass partners and everything, sure. Right? But people usually don't they don't usually dump everything, rip it. What do they call it? They rip and
replace.
Right. And so people aren't really doing that, right? There isn't the budget for that. Ideally, they would say, okay, we're going to use everything that Rockwell has and all of our partners and everything all interconnects and it's plug and play. But reality is that just doesn't happen. There's some legacy stuff out there. Yeah. There's analog stuff out there that you're just going to have to make work because we have to get some more miles out of this thing.
Yeah, and what systems integrators can be really helpful in that capacity is like helping with that roadmap, helping their customers figure out what steps and stages should I take so that I can most seamlessly, convert this old system over to newer hardware, newer software with expanded capabilities that are not only going to replace legacy equipment, but allow me to make better decisions and get better information out of my process. That's where integrators can be a great coach in that capacity.
Very good. Very good. Well, Chris, let's back up a little bit here. Tell me, where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Yeah, so I mentioned it briefly at the start of our conversation, but I am from St. Louis, Missouri originally. So grew up there for first 18 years of my life before going off to college at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So spent my formative years in the Midwest and two, maybe not coincidentally, two very world-renowned beer towns. Grew up there. My grandfather on my dad's side of the family and all his brothers, they used to work for the Anheuser-Busch Brewery back in the day, and I even was lucky enough to have a co-op stint there as well when I was still in school. So, I've got my roots in the Midwest, and as a result, a few roots in the beer world as well. So when I started to move off to work for Rockwell in Houston, Texas, and California, and move beyond my hometown, I had a bit of a natural beer base, I should say, that made manufacturing happy hour seem like a good fit from a personal branding standpoint too.
Absolutely. No, that you didn't get that past me. I definitely noticed the St. Louis and the Milwaukee connection. And I was just in San Francisco. There is some great local beer out there as well. I don't know if it's known. It's probably known more for obviously wine country just north of there as well. But I'm sure they have some a lot of areas getting well known for microbrewing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. The craft beer explosion has just been something, incredible over the past decade. And I kind of accredit it to the big breweries like Miller and Anheuser-Busch being bought out by foreign companies. So you had a lot of these, you had companies getting restructured. You had a lot of skilled brewers and people that understood the industry at these companies, and they started going out, making their own breweries in their hometown. So I think that's been a big catalyst for the craft beer market. One other thing I'll mention regarding manufacturing happy hour is it goes beyond being a video series. We once we noticed that people were starting to engage with the online content, we decided it made a lot of sense to have networking happy hours called manufacturing happy hours, where we gather thought leaders and manufacturing companies in the Bay Area, and that includes integrators, OEMs, and end users, and we bring them together to talk about the issues impacting the manufacturing industry amongst themselves as well, where Rockwell is simply the catalyst for bringing together those relationships. So it's amazing the conversations that can come up over a good beer and the ideas that come out of those discussions. So
absolutely. So people know that you work for Rockwell, but this is your show. How do you get away with drinking a beer?
So it's interesting. I started the video series, and probably for the first 9 months or so, I just sent it as videos in an email to my customer base. So I just built up some content, and it was really a way for me to deliver a video newsletter. I'll let you in on a couple secrets. There's not always beer sitting in those pint glasses. Sometimes it's, if we're at a trade show, it might be iced tea. But something that looks like, on the screen, it might be a beer. So the point of the video series is not necessarily to drink at work. The bigger point of it is, like we've talked about before, to make manufacturing and automation technology more approachable, to a standpoint that you watch these videos and you think, you know what, this is a conversation that I'm capable of having. Whether it's the Internet of Things, whether it's smart manufacturing, whether it's IT, OT convergence, these are conversations that I can have over a beer sometime, and it's something that we can start addressing that way. So, yeah. But yes, that would a little of it goes back to the classic, better to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. But I think the biggest thing is the goal of the video series, first and foremost, is to provide actionable information to the manufacturing audience, have a call to action, and then sure, there's a pint glass in front of us that has the company logo on it and whatnot, but it's all in an effort to make it approachable and provide the information to our customers in a new, unique format.
Oh, very good. Now, Chris, I definitely want to kind of dig into you as well here. So, what are you an engineer by trade? Do you have an engineering, like an electrical engineering degree?
Yeah. So I'm a mechanical engineer by degree through Marquette, but I very quickly went the commercial side when I came out of school. I've always gravitated to, I guess, performance, for lack of a better word. I've played in bands. I do a podcast outside of work as well. I've loved being on stage, and I noticed that this whole thing of sales engineering or being an account manager, which in most schools isn't always talked about. I didn't realize I was a career path until I really started looking for jobs. And I'm like, well, that sounds like the perfect mix. I can utilize my technical background, but I can do something that caters to my interest in being in front of people, helping them with their challenges, communicating throughout different mediums. So that was one of the things that really attracted me to it right off the bat, because I love the idea of being able to help multiple companies solve their business challenges through our solutions.
Very good. So you're a mechanical engineer. So I always like to ask engineers, did they always know they were an engineer? Even as a kid? I mean, were you tearing stuff apart? You tearing your toys apart as a kid?
Yeah, so we'll dissect this a little further. I wouldn't say this is necessarily the best reason to choose an engineering degree, but fortunately it's a very pragmatic degree regardless of what career path you go. In 4th grade, I rode like my first looping roller coaster at Six Flags St. Louis, and then I found out engineers were the people that designed roller coasters, and I'm like, well, I want to be an engineer. And that is literally the mentality that I kept with me from 4th grade all the way into and through college. It's like, I'm doing this because I kind of want to design roller coasters someday. Naturally, that career path has changed a little bit, but since I'm able to do things that involve my love of media and performance through the podcast and the video series, and mix that in with a fulfilling job at a great company, I've balanced out the fact that my career trajectory is a little different than what I envisioned it when I was a young 4th grader.
I love it. Here, well, I'm sure you probably designed some stuff on paper. So, I think there was some sort of video or story or something on that where there was they had kids design roller coaster, and then they actually created a real life roller coaster. Now some of these won't work.
Yeah,
but they actually did had like kids design a real roller coaster. I can't remember where that was, but I remember hearing about that in the news or some YouTube video or something.
Yeah, I've seen some. I mean, there are people that have designed some pretty elaborate, like homegrown roller coasters in their backyard. I wouldn't recommend that really, because there strikes me as being some risk to that. But that would have certainly been something that I would have done back in the day, and maybe I'll even go against my own advice and do that at some point when I have a bigger backyard than the space I'm able to manage here in San Francisco. But nevertheless, I was a big roller coaster tycoon fanatic, and even when I travel these days, if I can hit up an amusement park that has some excellent roller coasters, I'll try to make a day for that as well. I haven't lost that interest.
That's very good. I remember as a kid in high school, and one of the coolest days that we had was in physics class, going to a nearby amusement park. And now we got to have fun, of course, but also part of it was picking a ride and then having to just basically describe how it worked. So that was pretty. I didn't end up in engineering or anything like that. It's kind of surprising given my I love and like science, but didn't end up maybe because when I tear something apart, there's usually parts left over if I try to. So maybe
I gotcha. That sounds like a cool field trip. I mean, certainly my love of roller coasters made contextualizing physics certainly easier when you're thinking about potential energy and how gravity and forces play into a ride from start to finish. So it certainly gave me a fun way to make contextualizing the physics much easier as I was going through school. So my love of roller coasters, while it might not have directly affected my career like I thought it would at one point, it certainly played a big part in my life one way or another.
Very good. Well, we know it's no secret. We're talking about, kids and high school kids and college kids with an interest in engineering. It's obviously it's a huge vacuum of talent, right? And so integrators are always looking for people, any kind of manufacturing, a huge vacuum in those kind of jobs. What would you tell a student of maybe somewhere between high school and college? What's cool about industrial automation? What's cool about mechanical engineering that they should maybe think about, and what should they do to prepare for maybe a career?
Yeah, well, I think and I'm biased because I am an engineer, is one of my first pieces of advice would be get an engineering degree. And the joke that I tell people is, you've never heard someone, say, well, you're a journalism major, you can figure it out. But you hear someone say, you're an engineer, you can figure it out. And there's sorry, any journalism majors that are listening to this, that was not a dig at journalism, but the reality is what you learn in engineering is you learn how to dissect problems. A lot of the things we've been talking about, figuring out where you want to be and working backwards, that's what an engineering problem is. You learn how to break down a challenge into steps, and whether you're working on something technical or whether you're working with people, there's an element to breaking that down. And I think engineering does an excellent job of preparing people for that, even if you, for example, like me, might go the sales route, or, an engineering degree will be a great foundation for anything. But more tactically to industrial automation, the way I describe it, and I'm sure you've heard this on the show before, is if you've seen the show How It's Made, we're doing all, like in industrial automation, it's like the nervous system of a manufacturing facility. It's all the sensors, it's all the motors, it's all the electronics that you don't necessarily see behind the mechanical equipment that are controlling the equipment, telling it what to do, but also bringing that information back to the people that are running the operation and help them to make decisions that will improve their process, impact their process. So just being able to see that process come together and see the technology that's a part of that, because nowadays, while, Facebook, Google, a software company might be the sexy front runner for a career, the reality is technology is one of if it is the biggest part of the manufacturing industry. And there's some incredible problems that you get to solve on a daily basis when you're in industrial automation, manufacturing, or any of those spaces.
Yeah, and actually, manufacturing and automation are sometimes in the unlikeliest, or like you said, maybe even sometimes the unsexy places. So, not that actually brewing is pretty cool, but even some of the smallest brewers or these micro brewers are using a decent amount of automation, and they've had a system integrator come in. And I know there's a brewery here just outside Madison that basically they don't have very many employees. They run several processes and several vats from a desk and 6 monitors, and that's mission control. And they get a lot of work done because they've, everything through sensors and valves and automation that is, basically all run from a desk.
Yeah, you're seeing, I think any industry that like kind of really starts coming up like craft brewing did 10 years ago and how it's evolved over the years. And you're seeing a lot of these breweries scale. They recognize that automation is a key part of it. And I think, to the credit of the brewing industry, I think that's one of the spaces that has really made like manufacturing in the maker world more appealing, because they see that, brewing has a lot of parallels between a lot of other industries, whether you're doing a batch of beer or batching in, let's say, the life sciences or pharmaceutical industry. There are a number of best practices that go from one industry to another.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Chris, I always try to leave on a last couple questions here, because people really want to understand how someone is successful. And so I always like to ask people, how do you spend the first 90 minutes of your day? What kind of sets you up for success?
Yeah. So I've and it's usually an hour is kind of the perfect amount for me. So I do have a morning routine, and I've written about it before in an article called 12 Ounces of Coffee and Punk Rock. So there are some typical things to my morning routine that I do, where I do some core and ab exercises and some push-ups just to kind of get the energy flowing, wakes me up a little bit. I do a 2-minute meditation. And then after that, I should back up. First thing I do is I make my bed. One, I'm kind of a clean freak, so I've been doing that for a long time. But ever since I heard that commencement speech from that Navy SEAL at Texas, probably 3 or 4 years ago, it's become an even bigger habit for me just to like get that bed made, because it is that first thing you accomplish any day. But another big thing for me after the workout and meditation is breakfast. I've got to eat. It is my favorite meal of the day, and it gives me that fuel to really sit down and concentrate and not feel empty as I'm sitting down at my desk to get to work. But after that, I make up some coffee. I pop on the headphones and listen to a couple fast, loud punk rock songs. I'm a big punk rock guy. That's what's always gotten me pumped up, whether it's working or driving or snowboarding. And then, I buckle down and get to work after that. So
excellent.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the morning routine. When I've talked about it before, I kind of poke fun at it, because I think some people have made morning routines so additive that it's like, wow, it's going to take you 2.5 hours to start your day. But I do think it's important to have that practice that gets you in the right headspace to start really focusing and getting to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's even more important with today, is where, work is fluid. Work happens a lot of different places. So it happens in your car. It happens at 7 o'clock at night. It happens, not just between the bounds of an office from 8 to 5. Definitely.
For sure.
Excellent.
For sure.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. And thanks for coming on.
Hey, no problem, Tony. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Chris Luecke is the host of Manufacturing Happy Hour, and you can find it on YouTube. And there might be some rumblings that Chris is coming out with a podcast. as well. A lot of great references today here, Chris. I think I'm going to definitely go back, and I know you make mentions to some other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely will put those in the show notes so people can grab a link to those. And also that commencement address by that Navy commander or admiral talking about the first thing he does is make his bed, because at least no matter how the day goes, he always got that task done. So I love that sentiment. So
yep. No, it's a great one. And yep, again, thanks so much for having me on. And I love the work you're doing on this show. I've listened to a handful of episodes once I found out about it. So keep up the great work, man.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate your support. We've been talking industrial automation with Chris Luecke. Thanks so much. Take care. And listen to manufacturing, or watch Manufacturing Happy Hour on YouTube.
Thanks. Stay innovative. Stay thirsty, everyone. Cheers.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Help others find us by sharing your favorite episode with a colleague, and give us a rating in iTunes. Visit CSIAexchange.com/podcast for a full list of episodes. Contact us at podcast@controlsys.org. podcast@controlsys.org. Thanks to bensound.com for the music.
Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Read the Industrial Automation blog and find and research qualified system integrators at CSIAexchange.com. For more information on why your system integrator should be CSIA certified, visit controlsys.org. controlsys.org.